Welcome, everybody, to a special web series we are doing in conjunction with Microsoft. This is all about personalized student experiences in the higher ed. I'm Carl Hooker. I'm your host. I'm an educational consultant, former educator, former teacher, author, speaker here in Austin, Texas. And I've got a great lineup over the next several weeks, starting with today's topic. But before we get to that, just a little bit of housekeeping here. This webinar is being recorded, of course, and being posted on YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter. We do have the chat enabled, so if you're commenting while we're doing this live, those comments can pop up live and we can take some questions if you're interested. So please feel free to get involved. Of course, we also have this recording available afterwards, so if you miss some of it, you'll be able to watch it in its entirety. And if we have a little bit of time at the end, we'll try to take on a couple of audience questions, but this is going to be a jam-packed 30 minutes. And so I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to bring up our special guest right now. This is Rob Curtin. He is the director of higher education at Microsoft, but he's going to tell you why what he has to say is important.
Why should anyone listen to me?
There we go.
Yeah, I guess the answer would be 30 years of courtside seats. I'm a super fan for higher ed and student engagement. My first co-op job at Northeastern, go Huskies, was working for IBM in the Boston Public Schools. And since that time, I've worked at Microsoft and a couple of startups through the end user computing phase, when I like to joke before Excel had an auto sum button, through the enterprise empowerment days of ERP, worked for a firm called Exeter that went on to be acquired by Sallie Mae and ultimately SCT in the heyday of student information systems. Looked after our enterprise business within the United States for about 10 years at Microsoft. So, and then the past 7 years been a worldwide role. So basically, I've got the best view of the field, and I'll challenge anyone on that because the visibility I get to some of the great things being done at community colleges, the innovation at some of what might be considered second-tier state institutions who are providing, in my opinion, some of the greatest mobility to citizens around the world. And then obviously the fantastic research and academics in our most prestigious and top tier institutions, to be able to see the best practices coming out across higher ed and to have what I call courtside seats. It is NBA finals time. It's really been a pleasure to see the innovation in higher ed. So maybe Malcolm Gladwell said it best. I'm just a connector.
Nice. Well, I can't think of a better person to start us off on this series because, again, you bring such a global, wide view of what's happening across the higher education landscape. And you know, it's been disrupted with pandemics. Now the new disruption, of course, AI. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I think before we do that, let's kind of set the table here. And let's talk about just the current state as it sits of higher education. And then specifically, of course, our theme is personalized experiences for students. So what are higher ed institutions doing around this right now? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a great question, right? There's the current state of higher ed. And then within that, there's even the, well, what do you mean by personalized experiences? And who you ask is going to provide different answers. There's not one answer that's better or more accurate than another. But if you ask an academic, the term personalization is not new. It refers to personalized learning, which typically means adaptive models that will either change content, make pace more aggressive, alter the sequence based on a learner profile. So from a personalization standpoint in the classroom, K-12 has certainly been talking about this, higher ed a little less so. But I think most often in higher ed, it's about engagement. It's not about learning, it's about personalized engagement, with a clear focus on recruiting, retention, graduation, placement, all the key milestones. And so personalization from that perspective comes down to communication. How do we vary tone? How do we make sure we're highlighting what that individual person might be more interested in? But increasingly, and coming out of the pandemic, what was once called high flex, right? High flex engagement or multimodal engagement is beginning to take a bigger stance around, like, how do we personalize the offering itself? How to stackable credentials, how to on-campus, off-campus, student choice, personalizing the end-to-end experience and not just personalizing the communications or the learning content, that to me is the really exciting conversation within higher ed today. And we've seen other terms like the unbundling of education. It's not really a new concept. The concepts are pretty persistent. The methods are what change. What method might we use to do it now?
Yeah, of course, as you're talking, I'm hearkening back to my own experiences in higher ed. And I think a lot of you listening out there today or watching this later on a recording are probably thinking about what kind of experience did you have and what were some of the things you gained out of that experience? Like for me, I got a lot from the classes, but I got a lot from like you were saying, outside of that even, right? What are schools doing that's different out there? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that for just a second?
Sure. Well, I think so many realize there's kind of two things, right? One, the greatest amount of learning in traditional higher ed occurs outside the classroom. With apologies to every faculty member and
I know
some of my favorite professors, Professor Ron Thomas, there were some great ones at Northeastern. Everyone thinks they're an expert because they went to college. And most of the people that we know that went to college typically went to a college that was bumper sticker worthy. But we're the minority of college students. The overwhelming majority of college students are attending more than one institution. They're cobbling credits together. They're thinking about ways where they can either advance their career or their life. It's not always just about graduation. And so there's this one idyllic experience of what we had, and there's certainly lots of institutions still driving in that area. And heck, there's an old colleague of mine, Dave Becker, has a solution, Campus ESP, where their entire solution is marketing to parents with the understanding that the experience is as much a parent experience as it is the student experience. And so as institutions think about experience, that campus experience is really shared by the whole family, as is the debt burden in a lot of cases. And so the family wants to be a part of it. And that experience is something schools have had to continue to ratchet up because that's where the competitive ground is. And so when we look at sort of the ballooning costs of higher ed, there's an oft-cited statistic that administrative costs have gone through the roof, where they're really here for academics. I would challenge that in many cases, right? And don't shoot the messenger. Very few students are choosing an institution because of Professor A, B, or C at the undergraduate level. They're choosing a holistic experience. That's the competitive battleground. That's what's getting a lot of investment. Personalization matters. The other end of the spectrum is less about, rock climbing walls, great gyms, 4K televisions everywhere. It's around convenience and access. And I think that's actually the sustainability and operational opportunity for most institutions. The overwhelming number of adult learners that need professional skills, enhanced competencies, they're looking for experiences that are less immersive. And so how we take our offerings and make them available, how we rethink the credential to give it a professional boost in maybe a 3 to 6 month. Those are the fun conversations that we're a part of today. And as people rethink access and equity, it's not just about diversity for the incoming freshman class. It's about, and that would be in most cases biodemographic diversity. It's about reaching diverse lifestyles, diverse learner styles, and actually having an operational model to reach those learners, because that's the only way to be sustainable right now.
Yeah, you're kind of hitting on this question right now, right in this point, and we're talking about, that idea of creating diversity of, like you're saying, it could be diversity of thought, diversity of how you learn, right? So not everyone learns from 8 to 5 every day. Some people are managing jobs, managing other lives while they're going to school. But higher ed, like you said, it's almost like you have to make a case. Why is this important for them to be thinking about? Even, why not just stay with the tried and true? We're tenured professors. The kids will show up or they won't. But should they be thinking more and more about what you're just talking about, that inclusivity, and then also again creating more of an immersive experience and environment? I say here in the question, but why should that? Before we get into the what and the how that would actually happen, why is that important?
Why it's important is 2 really good reasons. It's just the right thing to do, and you kind of have to do it to stay in business. And so that's a nice combo when it's a combination of it's the right thing to do and it's what we have to do. So from a right thing, there's certainly an awful lot of press and I think well-intentioned movement to improve biodemographic diversity, diversity from socioeconomic backgrounds, even regional and point of view, so you have a thriving campus. What doesn't get talked about is the operational need to reach more learners and the workforce need to actually educate employees, myself included. I'm signed up and I went to places like Coursera to understand how to do prompt engineering and what it's going to mean for my job as generative AI comes in. I would love to be able to reconnect with my alma mater or an institution, maybe one of my kids went to, that I have some affinity for. And Microsoft, frankly, like most employers, has a tremendous benefit for all employees that goes untapped. And that is, I can take courses and they'll reimburse me for a pretty substantial amount every year, but no one's made that easy, right? They've made it really easy to do alumni matching. I can easily submit an alumni match. No one's made it easy to do tuition reimbursement. And to be frank, the car windshield company has. The car windshield company makes it super easy. Yeah. They come here, they change their windshield, they do all the billing. Well, there's money sitting here. And my company and so many other companies have a massive workforce reskilling need. And our desire to connect with a branded institution is really high. But the operational model to go do that hasn't really been figured out.
And before we go on to the next question, I want to thank those of you that are joining us live. I've seen a couple comments pop into the chat. We'll put you up on screen. If you have a question or comment for Rob or myself, feel free to drop it into the comment section of whatever platform you're watching on right now. Yeah, we talked a little bit about why and, kind of thought about this idealistic, we want to have this personalized future. And I think for those that are listening right now that are in higher education, maybe they're in the classroom, maybe they're behind, the walls and wires of IT. What are maybe some things that are really holding back those as institutions from creating that experience, that true flexible experience where it's, kind of being delivered, you're a part of it, you get a say in it as a student versus I have to go through kind of the motions of what higher ed is, and then I get my little piece of paper when it's done?
The answer is always people, process, technology, right? So we can walk through those three things, but people are simultaneously the energy and the inspiration and the force that's going to drive that change. But culture, in many times, really is the hard part. Right. I work with some institutions who quite literally tell me, we have a workforce that we cannot change, either because it's union or the faculty model. We cannot change them. And they don't want to change, and it's completely human culturally to want to be an expert at something you're really good at. I'm guilty of this.
Sure, me too.
I don't read things. I don't communicate in the same way my children do who are in their 20s, and I like to be expert. And when someone comes along and says, we're going to move your cheese, they're defensive. Of course they're defensive. It was hard during the pandemic when you were a well-respected lecturer, and next thing you know, you're sitting in a video conference call, and you're not sure who's coming in, and you feel uneasy. And so, culture is very often the hardest thing to get over. But so much of it is because the new processes that we want to implement are, frankly, they're not very well defined. And so, there's this sense right now of, we know there's a greater future in front of us. We know we can do things better, but the best practices really don't exist. The clear models for I want to be just like them don't necessarily exist yet, and they're still being formed, which means it's really tough to hold technology to the standard to say, well, help us do this. I had a call scheduled earlier today, and I actually missed it. I'm kind of in trouble. It wasn't on my calendar, with a professor, Naval Postgraduate School, Professor Raluca Guerra. I hate just calling her out, but she's doing amazing things in the classroom with graduate students using OneNote and Teams and changing the culture. But it's not replicated across every other faculty member, right? It's not something that everyone goes, oh, I'll do just like that. she's become a master of that craft, and she goes back and replenishes her skills, updates it, and it takes a lot of work. And we're working closely with her because the technology, which is now the third part, is catching up. It's not perfect. No one has ever said, I can't wait to attend a meeting in Teams or Zoom or some other, but it's better than nothing. And that's what Clayton Christensen always said, right? It's better than not getting together. So when the alternative is nothing, this is indeed better. And then we discover certain things we do like about it, like, oh, the side chat's better. The automatic transcript is better. That Copilot thing that took notes for us and recapped the meeting, well, that was actually cool. And so the bad alternative, which is well documented in the Innovator's Dilemma that Christensen outlined, starts to ratchet up a new set of standards. And so what I really think our job is focusing on what I call personas, and really understanding who the people are, helping institutions with culture. And if we listen well and we know, well, what is this persona as far as a student really want? How important are faculty in delivering that experience? Then we can start to improve our technology. But frankly, the number of solutions out there for a known best practice are really kind of short. So schools are all working right now to figure out what the right operational model is. How do I change the culture, and how do I implement the technology to meet what is a moving target? And higher ed doesn't reward failure very well, right? Like getting an F. And so there's all kinds of fail fast statements, but it's not really a culture that says go forward and try it, and if it fails, we'll say great for you for trying. It's kind of like, oh, that project failed. It's the technology's fault.
As somebody who wrote a book on failure and why it needs to be embedded in the K-12 classroom, you're speaking right to my heart, Rob. It's and I think what's interesting is, that fail forward, fail fast model. We try to get that. We talk about an entrepreneurship all the time, and then in schools, like you said, it's just kind of isolated. Or you'll have the one-off cases. So what you were just talking about with that professor you were mentioning, that happens in K-12 too, where it's what I call pockets of innovation. You do these amazing things. You close your doors and do these amazing things in your classroom. And then unfortunately, the person right next door to you doesn't get to see it. And maybe, like you said, it goes back to organization. It goes back to the culture. And now the technology is, again, innovating and disrupting. And as we look forward, I've got to ask now, because, of course, you can't go any more than like 3 minutes without someone mentioning it. Let's talk about AI. And then we can, AI, we should probably talk about that too. I mean, in general, it's been around for a while. I think the generative one is the one that everyone's getting excited about. Copilot, ChatGPT, things like that. So what role do you think, or could you envision that playing? Because it's coming fast. And maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is the thing that we need to motivate that change you're talking about to get the culture to kind of shift a little bit. How can that help higher ed with this personalized experience? I'm
maybe a little bit of a counterculture person here. Gartner has a very great hype cycle, right? The Gartner hype cycle.
Yes, the hype cycle.
Trademark Gartner is pretty popular. I think it's also spot on, right? There's the rise until we hit the peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, and then the plateau of productivity that goes out there. AI is absolutely coming up. And, I absolutely see some comments, right, that similar to what I just said earlier. Colleges are just dying. Faculty that I mentioned, even administrators, they want to go back to what they were doing, right? And so what we saw at the turn of the century, late 90s, 2000s, was the introduction of a compelling set of new technologies that did indeed drive process change. And those technologies had a compelling event associated with them, Y2K, right? And so the combination of better reporting, workflow, self-service, Y2K, we had this massive influx to drive change. And I think AI, beyond the hype cycle, is actually a piece of compelling new technology, particularly generative AI. In the past 6 months, and from a news cycle standpoint, 6 months has really been what it is. The standard, hey, this is new, human reaction first is fear. it's going to blow plagiarism up. And then people start to rationalize and say, oh, actually, it's pretty cool. It could help fill out a grant proposal for me. It could fill out a student learning outcomes report. It could fill in a bunch of student comments. So there's value out of generative AI that's being realized, but there's an awful lot of justified fear and concern about the responsible use of AI, alignment to AI to policies. And so I think what we'll see is a whole new market of solutions with AI built in. And in some cases, that's going to be AI for pure insights, which we've seen before, whether that's neural networks, risk identification, projecting what you could or shouldn't do as the best next action. But now when it's actually generating a custom response, humans are still going to be part of it. We've had the ability, and everyone sees cars that back up, right, and park by themselves, but people are still driving trucks. People are still sitting in the car. And so faculty are never going away. A great educator is an even better educator when they're powered by AI. Administrative systems that once automated workflow will now be dynamic and agile and can automate the generation of tedious and mundane tasks. And as easy as Microsoft makes it for me to do expenses, it couldn't be easier. I was still late this month, Carl, right? So I'm waiting for generative AI to help me actually fill out the expense report, look at my calendar, enter the business purpose, and probably catch me. I don't know what toll receipt I forgot to get, but it's going to help me in those things too. So I think AI is going to serve as a compelling enough technology for people to say, we need to do things differently now because I think the hardest thing is getting people to understand why they needed to change. The pandemic became a force. Oh, I got to change because this pandemic hit us.
Yeah.
Campus is closed. I think AI is driving conversations. It's driving cultural awareness, and it's driving a recognition that the next wave is here to come. And I don't want to dwell on this point, but the average age, there's wonderful research from Vicky Tambellini and the Tambellini Group. A little over a year ago, as I read it, they had claimed that only 5% of United States institutions had selected a modern student information system.
Interesting.
By my best estimates, less than half of them are actually live, right? So I know there's a couple. Shout out to Patty Abbott, doing great stuff. But there's a couple live that on a modern SIS. But most people are using their SIS that was selected in like 2000, 2002, right? It was designed in 1990X, right? So if you're running Banner, if you're running what is Oracle's formerly PeopleSoft campus solutions, DataTel's colleague, I helped sell these systems when I was 29. I'm 55. So we're talking about 20-year-old systems that were designed, selected, and began implementation before the iPhone, before Facebook, before anyone swiped right on anybody else. And when we start thinking about the expectations of today's learners, the experiences that an institution's able to deliver with technologies that were never, ever meant. They're fantastic and they're still in place. They still work, but there's been nothing compelling that is saying, I need to change this. And in 20 years, institutions have worked really hard to keep up. And so now these ERP solutions are surrounded by all kinds of other things. And so I think AI is really going to help us in bringing data together, in helping people think that the value of one integrated system that they picked 20 years ago, that value is still here today. It's just that the recognition is I don't get it by integrating 3 apps, right? HR, student, and finance. I get one integrated system from an integrated platform. when I have my data, my intelligence, my insight, the generative AI, identity, so I'm doing it the right way. I think that's where we're seeing that infrastructure becomes your integrated system, and it can generate and support lots and lots of apps. And so that's what I think AI is really about. It's going to cause a compelling event, a wave of new solutions that enter in the intelligence era, and it's going to drive institutions to what I call paint the baseboards. Right? They're going to get their data estate in order. They're going to make sure that they can put it in an environment that they control, because AI that doesn't follow your responsible patterns is dangerous. And so
Right.
when you control your data, you understand identity, you know the integration model, now you have a degree of control. And what people really fear, particularly with that, was sort of ChatGPT, was it was uncontrolled. It was coming in from the outside.
I'm trying to imagine or envision this, what you're talking about. So you have this unified kind of consistent platform, right? And it can distribute different apps, because right now, again, college students going down campus, they have their LMS, they have their, they have their app for email, they have their app for different events that are happening or taking place on campus. Maybe they have their app for the food services or whatever that they're getting. And each one of those, I think, are almost floating silos in some ways. Kind of explain, what is your vision of this? So let's say you just said less than 5% pretty much going to some sort of unified platform on the back end. What do
less
you
than 5% selected?
That's true.
I think it's less than 2% implemented.
They're actually doing it. Yeah, implemented. So what does that look like? I mean, what is this experience flipping it on its head, going from the kind of consistency on application level to like the personalization on application level? What does that look like to you as a kid walking into the classroom in 2025, let's say? What is that looking like to them just walking through campus?
Yeah, so I'm going to steal a quote that someone had said at EDUCAUSE. Jamie, I forget his last name. I think he's actually with Amazon right now, but he was with Three Rivers. It's like the best interface is no interface. And so the right experience for the student is there's actually not yet another app. It's whatever app they're in on whatever device they're in is actually the one that pops up and gives them a nudge. And, I joke, I happen to wear Whoop. You could have an Apple Watch, but, a little haptic nudge that just buzzes and forces me to look at my phone or look at an app, or gives me an IM within Teams and says, hey, you're sitting in the cafeteria, or you're in your dorm room, or you're still at the athletic facility. You're 5 minutes from class, right? Like, here's the closest conference room you could go to, or do you want me to just join you in on your phone right now and I'll automatically transfer you? That concept of one integrated system is still true. It's just that you're never going to integrate all the devices that people carry, all the applications that they love, all the use cases. What you can think about is the very human issue of who are you, right? Identity. What do I know about you? Data from the data lake. What do I really need to know and what's important right now? Insight driven by AI. What's the right way to tell you? That's integration, right? And orchestration. And that concept of my information infrastructure is exactly what our customers are building today. They're saying, I will need to replace my ERP. I will need to buy new applications based on all this. But what I can do today, is take my identity infrastructure, my information infrastructure, my intelligence infrastructure, my integration and orchestration infrastructure, and it actually all lives in the same environment that you already own in many cases. And whether it's Microsoft or it comes from third parties that plug into our core identity and data lake tools, that ecosystem will emerge. And I don't think it looks a whole lot different than, say, the iPhone or the Android devices that are out there now. But the enterprise is a very different level than a consumer experience. Trust, responsibility, privacy, compliance, the level of control that an institution needs, and the ability to land that within tools that people already use every day. So land it in the LMS, land it on your text, land it on your phone. that's where I see it being a little bit different. And it's challenging for some institutions because IT is saying, here's my architecture.
Right.
And the business office says, what are we buying? Right? I want to go buy a thing. And you don't necessarily have to go out and buy a thing. It's actually a matter of governance, culture, literacy. I think I saw you have Alice Way from USF coming up in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And so that's a great example of an institution that over the past 10 years, they've reached preeminent status in the state of Florida, which was previously reserved for FSU and UF. They were asked to consolidate. They had 3 separate campuses that were different OPIDs. They were asked to integrate into one central university with just 3 outposts. Well, that obviously dilutes their numbers, threatened their ability to maintain preeminent status. They kept it. They keep growing. They built a medical center downtown. They consolidated all their directions. So they've been working for, I'd say, 5 years now on getting toward this point. Like many institutions, when the pandemic came, within 2.5 days, they were able to go live and go to fully remote classes because all their identity was in one cloud. All the collaboration was right there, the data lake infrastructure. And one of the things that they do really well is on the data side, there's a whole team that's teaching data literacy, and they drove culture. So while they've happened to use our technology, it's not about Power BI. It's about what Jenny and her team have done, and Alice is coming from the experience side, what they've done to teach culture and to actually get people confident in the data, have data literacy classes, have rich data models, and driving that culture along with the inner technology. And then Alice is one who's really been big on personas. So she says, who am I serving? Who's the persona? What's the person? What do they need? I'm really looking forward to having you talk to Alice.
Yeah, and a different Alice actually just popped up right while you were talking about that, and she, kind of going through what you were just talking about with culture and organization and the technology change, and why it's sometimes easier to go back to what colleges were doing pre-pandemic, because that conversation is so hard, and the work you're talking about, and the work having someone like Alice Way, who like I said, we're going to bring up here in a couple of weeks, talk about having those lead people to kind of guide them through those conversations. This leads us to my last question, and this is. And again, we've flown by the 30 minutes. We're blowing past it, but I do want to get to this.
Kathy string.
Yeah, no, it's good. I do want to get to this because I think you've shown us a little bit about what's possible, and you've even told us that there are institutions that are already starting down this path, even if it's less than 2% that are actually implementing. So those listening to this right now, kind of hitting those three threads of organization, technology, and culture, where should they start next? What do you think are the next steps? Like, let's say next 6 months to 12 months out, because again, generative AI is here. It's going to get bigger, whether it goes through that cycle and then kind of flatline soon, who knows, but it's not going to go away. So what are those next steps?
So I would say it's 3 things. The first one's self-serving. The other one's not, right? And I'll be pretty transparent about that. The first is, honestly, get your information house in order. The cloud has kind of changed some things. The role of AI requires you to have understanding of your data, aggregation of that data. And that, number one, before you go commit tens of millions of dollars to an application, I would suggest that you spend a fraction of that, but it's still a major project to have control of what I'll call as an integrated information infrastructure, where identity, data state, integration, that's on a valid, cloud-based, secure, intelligent platform. Then, as you do sort of the internal housekeeping around funding infrastructure, right? No one likes to fund plumbing. They love to buy kitchen appliances, but no one really wants to run the cable that goes through the front yard to enable all of that. So, one, you've got to get that information in order. The second is actually about control. And I think one of the great things we're seeing with AI, and one of the reasons Microsoft does not at all own the ChatGPT, we're a major investor, and we have the rights to serve that in what's called Azure Open AI. So if you want AI to be used aligned with your principles as an institution, according to your policies, then Azure OpenAI allows you to do that and to land it easily within the tools people already use every day, notably Microsoft Office, Outlook, Teams, iOS devices, Android devices, running all those apps, Mac, Windows devices, all those apps are already there. So you can land those type of touch points with students, and you can control the AI and the experiences that you want to deliver by using Azure OpenAI. And so that's where I talk about control. And then that third piece is culture. You have to listen to faculty. You have to listen to students. You have to drive what we went through 5 years ago. Frankly, Satya Nadella took over at the time from Steve Ballmer. And the single greatest thing he did for our company was land the message from Carol Dweck about growth mindset.
Yes.
We were described as a know-it-all culture, like, we're going to beat you up. And he made us become a learn-it-all culture and embrace change and growth. And that was not, one PowerPoint slide. It was not like, hey, we'll just say this in the company meeting. Every single whiteboard in our company had a little sticker on it. Is this a growth mindset meeting or a fixed mindset meeting? But that concept that everything about campus culture is open for innovation, open for progress, and that it's coming not as a top-down directive, but as something that's going to make us thrive moving forward.
Well, I've only known you for a little while, Rob, but I will say that you definitely embody that concept of learning. And, just from our conversations we've had prior to this, it gives my heart some hope that you're kind of in a position where you can see all of this and help those that are trying to make that change. So I want to thank you for being a part of this first kickoff series. He's Rob Curtin, everybody. He's you can find him on the LinkedIn's, I would assume on the Twitters possibly too. What's your Twitter handle?
At Rob Curtin. I don't tweet a whole lot. I am on LinkedIn. I got to get more verbose on Twitter. I think I posted maybe my daughter's soccer picture a couple of years ago. I'm afraid of being attacked on Twitter, quite honestly. Whatever I say, someone's going to disagree with it. Where can we go for upskilling on Microsoft Azure was one of the questions that I see in the comment. The best place and thank you for asking about learning. There's a wonderful outlook called Microsoft Learn, all free. And so there are tools, there are learning pathways, all on Microsoft Learn. There's actually pathways for faculty. There's pathways for data science, for AI, for core Azure skills. So totally, I thank you for asking, Alice. And please do not feel bad. I've been called worse things. So thank you for getting the Curt part right. Rob Curtin is indeed my name, and Microsoft Learn has wonderful pathways. And it's the same courses you end up taking to get the certification exams as well. But you got to pay for those exams and the assessment. So
I'm throwing that down at the bottom here. You guys can see right there, learn.microsoft.com. Of course, there's lots of great opportunities there on the Microsoft website. And again, thank you, Rob, for being a part of this. And I'm going to send him off stage for a minute. So say goodbye, Rob.
Thanks, Carl.
And for those of you that are joining us again, there's lots of different opportunities we're going to have over the next several weeks. And Rob alluded to this just a little bit. We're actually going to talk to someone in the field. So we got a lot of information about why we should be doing these changes, why we should be creating these personalized learning experiences. We're going to talk on May 31st with Alice Way, who you heard Rob mention, who's at the University of South Florida. And I love this title, Assistant VP of Digital Transformation and Innovation. And I think this is the time. This is when things are starting to change. You need to have people in your organization like Alice. And I'm excited to hear from her, learn from her, hear some of the things, some of the challenges maybe she's had in the past, but also where she sees USF going in the future. So now if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a new link. This is our registration link that we have for this ongoing series. Some of you have joined us already via this link. This is really just an RSVP to say like, hey, I'll notify you when the conversation starts, but we will be posting out on all platforms, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter again. So if you want to sign up there, mrhook.it/personal. This has been Personalized Student Experiences in Higher Education. Thank you guys for joining us. And again, this will be rebroadcast on YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter. If you missed it today, you're probably watching me right now on a replay. So thank you so much. Thanks to Rob and the team at Microsoft for supporting this conversation. And we'll see you on May 31st, 2 p.m. Eastern time as we meet with Alice. Thank you, everybody.